There's a specific kind of pain that only shows up in public, and most people never admit how deeply it stays with them. It's the moment a comment lands in a meeting, not loud enough to be called an attack, but sharp enough that everyone hears it, or the sideways remark in front of friends, framed as humor, timed perfectly so laughing feels safer than speaking, or the casual joke from a stranger that turns you into the punchline for a few seconds too long. In that instant, your body reacts faster than your thoughts. Your chest tightens. Your heart starts racing. Your mind scrambles for words. Part of you wants to explain everything clearly so people won't misunderstand. Another part of you wants to disappear entirely, to mentally step out of the room and pretend this moment never happened. You feel exposed, not because what was said was devastating, but because it was witnessed. Shame doesn't hurt because it's true. It hurts because it's public. What follows is often worse than the comment itself. You replay it later, wondering why you spoke too fast, why your voice changed, why you felt smaller than you should have. You think the mistake was not having the right response, not being sharper, not being quicker. But that's not where the damage happened. You didn't lose because you were wrong. You lost because you reacted. The moment you rush to defend yourself, to justify, to soften the blow, you quietly accept the frame that something about you needs fixing. You hand them the knife and show them exactly where to press. Most people don't realize this because the reaction feels automatic, almost unavoidable. It feels human, and that's why it works so reliably. Public shaming doesn't rely on cruelty, it relies on instinct. It counts on your need to be seen as reasonable, competent, and acceptable in the eyes of others. Once that need is triggered, control shifts away from you. If any of this feels familiar, it's because it happens everywhere. Offices, social circles, family gatherings, even casual conversations. It's subtle, quick, and usually dismissed as nothing. But the body remembers it. The silence afterward. The heat in your face. The sense that something was taken from you in front of witnesses. This video is for that moment. Not the dramatic confrontations, but the quiet ones you carry home with you. Because until you understand why these moments hit so hard, they will keep finding you. And until you learn what actually gives them power, you'll keep thinking the problem is you when it never was. To move past shame, you need a different lens. One that doesn't come from modern self-help or moral advice, but from an older, colder understanding of how power actually works. This is where Machiavelli comes in. Not as a symbol of cruelty, but as a realist who studied human behavior without pretending people were kinder than they are. Machiavelli was not interested in who should be right or fair. He was interested in who survives pressure and who collapses under it. His insight was blunt. Public life is not a safe space. The moment other people are watching, evaluation begins and the rules change. Intentions matter less than appearances. Emotions matter less than control. In that environment, shame is not an accident or a misunderstanding. It is a tool. It is used to test your stability, to see if you can be pushed into reaction, explanation, or submission. And once you react, the hierarchy quietly rearranges itself. This video is not about learning smarter comebacks or sharper lines, because clever words do not protect you from emotional exposure. They often make it worse. The goal here is not to win exchanges. It is to stop bleeding internally when they happen. Machiavellian psychology is about removing leverage, not escalating conflict. When someone cannot pull an emotional response out of you, they lose their ability to control the situation. That is where power actually begins. Power begins the moment you stop needing to be understood in public. Machiavelli didn't teach cruelty. He taught survival. He understood that the most dangerous position is needing approval from people who have no stake in your life. Once you see public shame for what it really is, not a verdict on your value, but a social maneuver, you stop fighting it head on. You step outside of it. And from that position, you don't need to prove anything. You are no longer trying to look strong. You are becoming untouchable. The reason shame keeps putting you on the defensive has very little to do with character and everything to do with biology. When someone embarrasses you in front of others, your brain does not interpret it as a social nuance. It reads it as danger. The amygdala, an ancient survival mechanism, fires instantly and floods your system with urgency. Long before logic shows up, your body prepares for fight or flight. Your pulse accelerates, your breathing tightens, your focus narrows to one goal: escape the threat. In early human groups, public humiliation meant loss of status, and loss of status meant isolation. Isolation meant starvation. That wiring never left. So when a modern version of that threat appears, a sarcastic comment, a pointed joke, a subtle dig in a meeting, your nervous system reacts as if survival is on the line. This is why you speak before you think. This is why your explanations feel rushed. This is why your tone shifts even when your words are reasonable. Consider a familiar scenario. A boss makes a dry remark about your work in front of others. It's not an outright accusation, just enough to raise eyebrows. Before you consciously choose a response, you start filling the silence. You clarify. You add context. You explain decisions no one asked you to justify. Inside your head, you're protecting your reputation. Outside, something else is happening. Your status is leaking. The room reads your reaction, not your logic. In modern social environments, reaction is a signal. It shows who is emotionally exposed and who is stable under pressure. This is the part that feels unfair, but matters most. The person who reacts first is almost always perceived as lower in the hierarchy, not because they're wrong, but because they're readable. In modern life, whoever reacts first reveals weakness. Emotion is honest. Power is controlled. Shame works because it turns your biology against you, making you do the very thing that confirms the attacker's position. Smart people fall into this trap constantly because they think the exchange is about facts or fairness. It isn't. It's about regulation. Whoever controls their nervous system controls the interaction. Once you understand this, the self-blame fades. You stop thinking, "Why am I so bad at these moments?" and start seeing the pattern clearly. You weren't failing. You were being hijacked. Shame didn't beat you with words. It beat you by pulling a reaction out of your body. And here is the shift that changes everything. Biology can be trained. Once you recognize the trap, you can interrupt it. You can slow the impulse. You can choose not to feed the reaction. That awareness alone begins to tilt the balance. You realize that these moments are not tests of intelligence or worth. They are tests of control. And control, unlike instinct, can be learned. Silence is the most misunderstood response in social conflict. And that misunderstanding is exactly why it works. When an insult lands, it creates a vacuum. A sudden gap in the interaction that feels uncomfortable to almost everyone. Humans are wired to fill that gap immediately, because silence triggers anxiety, uncertainty, and a fear of losing connection. We rush to speak because we think quiet means defeat, embarrassment, or submission. In reality, silence is neither passive nor empty. It is loaded with pressure. It forces attention to linger. It delays resolution. And most importantly, it transfers the emotional burden back to the person who created the disruption. This is why silence becomes a weapon when shame is involved. The technique itself is simple, almost disappointingly so. When the comment comes, you do not smile to look agreeable. You do not frown to signal hurt. You do not roll your eyes or look away to escape the moment. You keep your face neutral, your posture relaxed, and you look directly at the person who spoke. Not with hostility, not with challenge, just steady, unreadable presence. Then you count slowly to 3 in your head. 1, 2, 3. That pause feels longer to them than it does to you. In those few seconds, the dynamic shifts. Everyone else in the room is waiting for your response, and when it doesn't arrive, their attention drifts back to the speaker. The weight of the moment changes hands. Imagine a coworker making a sarcastic remark during a meeting, testing you in front of others. Instead of defending your work or laughing it off, you pause, meet their eyes, and say nothing. The conversation stalls. Someone clears their throat. Another person glances away. The silence grows heavy, not for you, but for them. Silence is not weakness, it is pressure. You didn't avoid the insult, you handed it back. This works because silence removes your emotional signature from the exchange. Without visible reaction, there is nothing to hook into, nothing to escalate. The attacker may try to rescue themselves by adding words, softening the tone, or joking again. That is not confidence. That is discomfort. By holding still, you force them to carry the moment alone. Over time, this changes how people relate to you. They learn that provoking you does not produce entertainment, leverage, or control. It produces awkwardness, and awkwardness is socially expensive. Your own nervous system changes as well. Each time you hold silence instead of reacting, you teach your body that nothing bad happens when you don't perform. The fear fades. The urge to explain weakens. What once felt unbearable becomes natural. Eventually, you don't even think of it as a technique. It becomes your default presence. People sense that you are not easily moved, not easily rushed, not easily cornered. And once that signal is established, most attempts at public shaming never happen at all. Silence rewrites the interaction before it fully begins. Not through force, but through control. Most people think strength means pushing back, correcting the record, or proving they were misunderstood. But defense is the fastest way to lose control of a situation built on shame. The moment you argue facts or justify intent, you accept the attacker's frame and place yourself on trial. Psychological inversion works because it refuses that role entirely. Instead of focusing on what was said, you redirect attention to why it was said, shifting the spotlight from content to behavior. This move is subtle and devastating because it changes who is being evaluated. When someone throws a line meant to provoke, your job is not to clean it up or counter it, but to observe it. Calm observation destabilizes aggression. Imagine someone says, "You messed up," in front of others, with just enough edge to invite embarrassment. The expected response is apology, explanation, or deflection. The inverted response is silence for a beat, then a neutral question like, "Are you okay?" The words are soft, but the implication is heavy. You are not denying the claim. You are questioning the emotional state behind it. Suddenly, the room is no longer examining your mistake. It is noticing their tone. Another variation is even simpler. "That was a strange thing to say." No sarcasm, no heat, just a factual statement that names the behavior and lets it hang. This works because humans are acutely sensitive to social norms. By calmly labeling the comment as odd, you force everyone present to reevaluate it without you ever defending yourself. The calm one writes the story. Composure gives you narrative authority. Whoever explains is already losing because explanation signals vulnerability to judgment. When you remain grounded and curious, the attacker has to choose between escalating emotionally, which makes them look unstable, or retreating, which costs them face. Either way, you don't have to push. The structure collapses on its own. What makes this technique powerful is that it doesn't require cleverness or speed. It requires restraint. You are not winning by out-talking them. You are winning by refusing to be pulled into the emotional current they created. Over time, people notice something about you. You don't rush to defend. You don't scramble for approval. You don't perform under pressure. That pattern changes how others approach you before words are even exchanged. Attacks become rarer because they stop paying off. This is not manipulation. It is boundary setting at the level of perception. You are teaching others without lecturing that disrespect will not become a conversation. When you stop debating right and wrong and start reframing behavior, you remove the incentive to provoke you. The exchange ends not with a victory lap, but with a quiet imbalance in your favor. And in social dynamics, the quiet wins last the longest. Shame becomes most dangerous when the criticism is accurate, because truth feels like solid ground for the attacker and quicksand for you. Maybe you are blunt. Maybe you are late sometimes. Maybe you do have a reputation for being intense or difficult. When those labels are partly true, most people instinctively try to soften them, deny them, or explain them away, hoping to protect their image. That instinct keeps shame alive. Agree and amplify works because it does the opposite. It removes resistance. When someone says, "You're arrogant," and you respond calmly, "Yeah, it helps," you are not being sarcastic or self-destructive. You are refusing to treat the label as a wound. You are taking ownership of the trait before they can weaponize it. Shame only survives when you fight it. The moment you stop struggling against the truth, it loses leverage. This approach feels uncomfortable at first because it cuts against everything we're taught about managing reputation. We're told to appear humble, polished, and correctable. But power is not built on appearing flawless. It's built on appearing unashamed. When you agree without defensiveness and slightly amplify the point, you control the meaning of the flaw. You signal that you already know who you are, that you've considered this trait, and that it doesn't destabilize you. Imagine someone saying, "You don't really know what you're doing," expecting you to explain your process or list credentials. Instead, you smile lightly and say, "Sometimes," and it still works. The energy in the room changes. The comment no longer has bite. It sounds small, even petty, because there's nothing to push against. Confidence eats insults for breakfast because confidence doesn't argue with reality. It accepts it and moves on. This technique works because shame is not about facts. It's about reaction. A flaw you're embarrassed by becomes a permanent handle. A flaw you acknowledge openly becomes boring. People lose interest in attacking what doesn't bleed. If you're not ashamed, no one can shame you. Over time, this reshapes how others interact with you. They learn that pointing out your imperfections doesn't lower your status or give them control. It only exposes their intention to do so. The comments slow down. The tests stop. Not because you became nicer or quieter, but because you became unreactive to truth. Agree and amplify is not self-mockery, and it's not playing along to be liked. It's self-possession. It says, "I see myself clearly, and I'm still standing." Once you reach that place, honesty becomes armor instead of a liability. The truth no longer corners you, it frees you. To truly dismantle public shaming, you have to stop treating it as a personal attack and start seeing it for what it is. A performance that depends on an audience to have any power at all. The attacker is rarely interested in you as an individual. What they want is agreement, laughter, recognition, or silent alignment from the people watching. Shame is social theater, and without applause, it collapses. This is why focusing all your energy on the attacker is a mistake. You are feeding the wrong part of the system. The real leverage is the crowd. Once you understand that, your behavior shifts in a subtle but decisive way. Instead of locking eyes with the person trying to provoke you, you briefly acknowledge someone else nearby. Not dramatically, not in a way that looks planned. Just a quick glance and the faintest smirk, a look that says, "Are you seeing this?" without ever opening your mouth. This is triangulation. It quietly pulls the audience into your frame and pushes the attacker out of the center. Picture a social gathering where someone throws a sarcastic comment your way, loud enough for others to hear. Rather than reacting, you pause, then meet the eyes of a third person and let a slight, controlled expression pass across your face. That tiny moment does more than any comeback could. The energy in the room shifts. The crowd subconsciously follows the calm, not the noise. Power is social gravity. People move toward whoever feels grounded, relaxed, and unbothered. The attacker, suddenly cut off from attention, begins to look like they are trying too hard. And the one trying hardest is the weakest. This works because humans are deeply attuned to group dynamics. We take cues from one another constantly, often without realizing it. When you remain composed and subtly align yourself with the observers, you signal stability and leadership. You're not asking for approval, you're assuming it. Over time, this changes the social environment around you. Attacks lose momentum, jokes fall flat. The room stops rewarding the behavior. The attacker feels the loss immediately, because without social reinforcement, their words carry no weight. You didn't defeat them directly, you removed the stage. This approach isn't about humiliating anyone or turning the group against them. It's about withdrawing attention, which is the most valuable resource in any social setting. When you redirect that attention calmly and without explanation, shame has nowhere to land. You stop being the target and become the reference point. People sense it, even if they can't articulate why. And once you control where the attention flows, you control the interaction. You're no longer reacting inside someone else's script. You're shaping the social field itself, quietly, efficiently, and in plain sight. There is a category of people none of the previous methods will fully neutralize: the toxic attention seeker who does not care whether the attention is positive or negative, only that it exists. For them, conflict is oxygen. Reaction is validation. Engagement of any kind tells them they matter. This is where the nuclear option becomes necessary, not as a tactic of dominance, but as an act of removal. Active non-existence means you erase them from the interaction entirely. When they speak, you do not acknowledge it. You do not respond verbally. You do not pause your movement. You do not shift your facial expression. You simply continue whatever you were already doing, talking to someone else, finishing your sentence, checking your notes, asking another person a question, as if the sound never registered. If you're mid-conversation and they interrupt with a jab, you keep going. If they aim a comment directly at you, you redirect your attention elsewhere without explanation. This is not avoidance. This is deletion. It's critical to understand the difference between silent treatment and active non-existence. Silent treatment is emotional. It says, "You hurt me, so I'm withdrawing." That still centers them. Active non-existence says something much colder and more destabilizing. "You are not significant enough for my nervous system to register." Nothing hurts the ego like irrelevance. Attention is the highest currency, and you are refusing to spend it. For an attention seeker, this creates immediate internal panic. They escalate. They repeat themselves. They raise their voice. They sharpen the insult. And the more they do this while you remain unchanged, the more unstable they appear to everyone watching. You don't need to expose them. They expose themselves. This method works because it cuts off the reward loop completely. Without reaction, there is no payoff. Without payoff, the behavior cannot sustain itself. Over time, they learn that targeting you produces emptiness, not stimulation, and their focus moves elsewhere. This is not cruelty. It is boundary enforcement at the highest level. You are not punishing them. You are reallocating your attention to where it actually belongs. When people realize they cannot buy your focus with disrespect, they stop bidding. The atmosphere around you changes. Your presence becomes heavier, quieter, and more self-contained. You are no longer pulled into noise or chaos. You exist outside of it. And that position carries immense power because you are not winning by confrontation. You are winning by refusing to participate in a game designed to drain you. There are moments when restraint alone is not enough. When the disrespect repeats and allowing it to pass would silently train others that you can be crossed without consequence. In those moments, the response must be surgical, not emotional, brief, controlled, and final. This is not about escalating conflict or proving dominance through volume. It is about cutting off the behavior with minimal force and maximum clarity. The first incision is direct and disarming. Who are you trying to impress? Delivered calmly, without sarcasm. This question exposes the performance beneath the insult. It tells the room that the comment was not about truth or feedback, but about attention. The attacker is suddenly framed as someone seeking validation, not authority. The second strike is colder. Say that again. You lean in slightly, attentive, as if you genuinely didn't hear. Most insults depend on timing and surprise. Forced repetition drains them of energy. The words sound harsher, smaller, and often embarrassing when spoken twice. Many people retreat immediately, mumbling or changing the subject because the power of the moment has evaporated. The third strike works on a different level. You don't have to take it out on me. Said with neutral concern, this sentence reframes the attack as emotional overflow. You are no longer an opponent. You are an observer. The attacker is subtly positioned as someone who cannot regulate themselves. Each of these lines works for the same reason. They are short. Short sentences signal power. Long explanations signal insecurity. Precision beats aggression because aggression invites chaos, while precision ends it. Imagine a colleague snapping, "You clearly don't understand this," in front of others. Instead of defending yourself, you look at them and ask, "Who are you trying to impress?" The room goes quiet. Or picture someone making a cutting joke at your expense. You pause and say, "Say that again?" The laughter dies instantly. Or someone unloads frustration onto you and you respond evenly. You don't have to take it out on me. The emotional current shifts. In every case, you didn't insult them back. You named the behavior and removed its fuel. These lines are not weapons for frequent use. A surgeon does not swing wildly. One clean incision is enough. Used sparingly, They establish boundaries faster than any argument ever could. Once people learn that crossing you leads to swift, calm consequences, most stop testing you altogether. Not because you are intimidating, but because you are precise. All of these strategies work, but they are not meant to become your identity. They are scaffolding, not the building itself. The real goal is not mastering techniques to neutralize shame. It is reaching a point where shame no longer has anything to attach to. Shame survives in one place only: the parts of you that you secretly reject. As long as there are areas of your life you are hiding from yourself, other people will sense it, even if they can't explain how, and they will press there instinctively. This is why the final phase is not external. It is internal. It is the construction of an inner fortress that does not rely on performance, approval, or explanation. Start with money. Many people feel exposed around finances, not because of numbers, but because of what those numbers mean to them. When you are ashamed of where you are financially, a single comment can destabilize you. When you accept the truth of your situation without drama or self-loathing, the comment loses its edge. Move to your past. Mistakes, failures, embarrassing chapters, things you wish had gone differently. Shame feeds on the hope that these parts can be erased. The moment you stop trying to erase them and start owning them as chapters that shaped you, they stop being weapons. Then there is loneliness, one of the most powerful pressure points in modern life. When you see being alone as proof that something is wrong with you, any joke or hint cuts deep. When you see it as a season, a choice, or a byproduct of standards, the same words pass through without damage. This is shadow work in its most practical form. Not affirmations, not public confession. Quiet acceptance. You look directly at the things you avoid and say, "This exists, and I am still intact." When you stop hiding, they run out of ammunition. People can only shame what you pretend is not there. This inner acceptance changes everything externally. Your posture shifts, your timing slows, your voice steadies. You don't need to remember techniques because your nervous system is no longer searching for safety in other people's reactions. Over time, something unexpected happens. You're tested less, challenged less, provoked less. Not because you became nicer or more agreeable, but because you stopped signaling need. People test uncertainty. They poke at insecurity. When those signals disappear, so does the behavior. This is when respect begins to arrive quietly. Not admiration, not affection. Respect. When you stop asking to be liked, you start being respected. You no longer walk into rooms wondering how you will be perceived. You walk in observing. You choose where to place your attention, and attention, as you've learned, is the highest currency. Shame no longer feels like a threat at this stage. It feels like information, a reflection of someone else's state, not a verdict on your worth. You don't rush to correct it. You don't brace against it. You simply register it and move on. This is the final shift. You are no longer prey reacting to sudden movement. You are the trap, still, grounded, and aware. People sense the difference even if they can't articulate it. And once that presence is established, most conflicts resolve themselves before they ever reach you. Not because the world became kinder, but because you became unmovable.